Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Helya on Mythic in the Trial of Valor.
So this boss has been changed recently. We did actually wait for the nerfs before releasing this guide because we wanted to make sure that all the information was going to be relevant, but the nerfs they applied to the boss weren't actually that much of a big deal when it comes down to strategies. They just reduced the boss's health as well as various adds, as well as making the healing requirement slightly lower. So the encounter itself is still very difficult, there's still a lot to it. It just so happens that it's a little bit kinder to you now than what it was previously. Now in terms of raid composition, you want to bring 2 tanks, 4 healers, and then just make sure that you bring a balanced DPS makeup, and if you can prioritize classes with immunities, it'll make your phase 1 a lot easier. But also 2 Shadow Priests. There's a lot of master spelling you need to do in this encounter, and by having 2 Shadow Priests covering all of it, makes it a lot easier than say using a Disc or a Holy Priest.
So we've got a lot to go through, let's jump straight into Phase 1. Now just as a brief overview of what you'll be facing in Phase 1 and how to very quickly deal with it, with the breath that comes in, you still want to face it down the middle and kill off all the blobs that do spawn. With the tentacle strikes, they work the exact same way as they did on Heroic, however you'll have more tentacles spawn each time she does the slam, so instead of 1 coming down, you'll have 2, or even in some situations you'll have 3 coming down, all in a short period of time. This is what you want to be using your immunities for, and we'll be going through it in a moment. Now the Taint of the Sea debuff works the exact same way except 4 are applied at the same time. You really want to instantly dispel these in all cases. This is why Shadow Priests are so good, because you can just AoE mass dispel them, or you can just assign each healer to dispel an individual debuff. However, the most important thing in this phase for you to know about is the Orb of Corruption. Not only will they be spawning on different types of players and then rotating between those 2 sets of players, but also the orbs have a beam connecting them, which will just one-shot anyone that stood in between them, so you've got to be very careful when they come in.
And because of how awkward this beam is to deal with, your entire strategy in Phase 1 is positioning in such a way so that the beam isn't an issue. And in order to do that, you need to understand exactly how the orbs work. So orbs in Phase 1 will always be on your off tank, 1 random healer, and then 1 random ranged DPS. These are the ranged orbs. Then the next set of orbs will always be on the off tank, 1 random different healer, and then 1 random melee DPS. These are the melee orbs. So the orbs will always be on an off tank, always on a random healer, and then will alternate between a ranged or a melee player depending on what type of orbs they are. And like I said, as they're linked by a beam, it's unwise for the orbs to be spread in random locations all across the room, because people are simply going to be cut in half. So stacking before the orbs spawn is the best way to keep the beams tiny and also to keep it clean. So we have a red world marker just in front of the boss. Do note though it's slightly outside melee range. This is done so that orbs never spawn directly on top of melee, which just gives them more room to deal with other mechanics, and at certain parts of the fight you get multiple mechanics land in melee all at the same time, and having that extra space really helps. Now the very first set of orbs you get are always ranged orbs. We have our entire raid apart from the melee stack on top of the marker, and we move as an entire unit the moment the orbs spawn. If you can assign a movement speed increase for every single set of orbs, it makes things so much easier and it makes it far safer. However, if you don't have them available, it is possible to move from the orbs without one. Players targeted by the orbs simply just run down the side of the room, right up against the raised platform, so the orbs just stay far away from the rest of the raid, and players not targeted by the orb can simply just move away from that area. The next set of orbs will always be the melee orbs, and the melee orbs works exactly the same way, except instead of having your range stack on the red marker, you only have your healers, your off tank, and your melee stack on it. As soon as the orbs come out, you use your speed increase, you run down the side of the room, but one little tip for your melee DPS and your tank: if you actually run up the raised platform and then drop down, not only will you avoid the orb damage, but it's a much quicker way of getting back towards the boss. Now on every set of orbs you'll also have a Taint of the Sea. Just like Gworm, it's really good idea to actually have your healers signed to individual debuffs within your raid, because you want to remove them immediately. But on top of that, like we said at the start of the video, you can just have your Shadow Priest mass dispel them instead. And if you have 2 Shadow Priests, there is no reason whatsoever for the mass dispel to always go off, because if there's only 1 Shadow Priest, if he gets targeted by orbs, it can be a little bit clutch, especially if there's no movement speed increase available for him. Just keep in mind when you are dispelling, the quicker you do it, the better it is. We actually have 2 world markers placed towards the back of the room, so as soon as the orbs come in, everyone runs in that direction, and if you do have a Taint of the Sea debuff, you stand near those markers, because that's where the mass dispel is always done. That way, as soon as it has gone off, you can move into the clearer area towards the middle of the room. Do keep in mind though, the mass dispel will only hit your ranged players or people that are kiting orbs. Melee and tanks will often need to be spot dispelled instead. Now after you've kited the orbs towards the back and you have been dispelled and you have moved from the Taint of the Sea shit on the ground, you'll then need to move back towards the boss for the next set of orbs. However, before you do move there, you'll get another set of Taint of the Sea, so you must wait, be dispelled, and then move to the marker for the next set of orbs. If you move to the marker before the dispel, you're going to be on top of the marker, the orbs are about to come in, you're probably going to be dispelled, and then everyone's just going to run in random directions, and you're just going to have orbs all over the place, and people are going to die. The strat just becomes fucked. So you need to be patient, be dispelled, then move in. So that might be quite a lot of information. Let's talk about it in real time. Let's show how it actually works. The first orbs are always ranged orbs, so they'll come in, you'll get it on your off tank, one healer, one ranged DPS, you all want to be stacked on top of red, the orbs come in with a taint, you kite back, and you mass dispel at the exact same time. You then wait for the next taint to come in, you dispel it, and then your off tank and your healers and your melee DPS then stack at red, because next comes the melee orbs. The orbs will come in with taint, you kite back and you dispel at the exact same time, you then wait for taint again, you dispel the taint, then you have your off tank, your healers, and then your ranged stack back on red, because next is the ranged orbs. And you simply just repeat that throughout phase 1, switching between your ranged and your melee orbs, making sure that the right group is stood at the marker at the right time, and not there early, otherwise you just fuck it. Now for your healers in this phase, you can use cooldowns absolutely any way you want, it doesn't really matter, but the best time we found to use them was simply using them on ranged orbs, so we just assigned for each one. Now while you're dealing with the orbs and the taint, the tanks are going to have to deal with the breath. You guys need to make sure you face it right down the middle of the room and taunt off each other immediately because of the debuff that it applies. Do note that towards the end of the phase, the orb and the breath timer sort of desyncs, and as a result you might find yourself in a position where you're tanking just after a breath is hit, however your other tank is off kiting an orb, which means you might have to tank the boss with this debuff for up to say 4 or 5 seconds. Make sure you have a cooldown available for this because you're going to be taking so much extra damage, and the other tank just needs to make sure that he gets back as soon as possible so he can land a taunt. However, if your group's damage is high enough, you can very easily avoid this situation now since the nerfs. And on top of this, of course, your DPS actually needs to swap to them and kill them off. They do have way more health than what they did in, say, Heroic, but if you assign your DPS carefully, it's very easy to do. Simply just put your ranged DPS on the ones towards the back, and melee swap to the ones at the front. Blow them up as soon as you possibly can, and then go back to whatever you need to do.
Now you might be thinking that this phase might be already far too complicated. Well, there's one more layer for you to deal with, and that is the tentacle slams. Now the tentacles on Mythic do have set places where they will spawn, and they will also come in quick succession of one another. So instead of just one slamming at the front or the back like it is on Heroic, you'll instead have set places, like on the first tentacles as an example, 2 will slam at the front, it will go 1 slam, then another very shortly afterwards, and it is in set places. And the thing is, on Mythic, really you just want to have an immunity for every single set of tentacles. Now, it isn't as simple as just saying, okay, we'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just random immunity people. You can't really have a ranged player soak some tentacles at the back of the room at the same time ranged orbs come in, and the same thing for melee DPS. You need to make it so certain players will soak certain tentacles at set times throughout the phase. It's quite complicated, so let's get straight into it. Now for the first set of tentacles that come in, which is 2 slams at the front of the room, you want to have a ranged player immune both of the tentacles right there. This must be a ranged player as the melee orbs come in at the same time, and as I said, you don't want a melee player trying to soak and an orb spawns them at the same time because you're just going to cut someone in half. For the second set of tentacles, you want a ranged player at the back of the room and a melee player at the front. You cannot soak both of the tentacles with one player at the same time. There's a tiny little gap and your hitbox just isn't big enough, so you need to have one player at the back and one player at the front. Now these tentacles come in just after a set of ranged orbs, so it is good to have a backup soaker for the ranged player just in case they are the one who has to kite around in a circle. Now for the third set of tentacles, which is 2 slams at the back of the room, you need to have a melee player run all the way back there and immune both of them. Ranged players cannot do it because unfortunately there are ranged orbs at this time. Rep paladins are really good because their bubble lasts a nice long period of time, however a carefully timed soak with a rogue using cloak can do the job. Now for the fourth set of tentacles, this one's a little bit more complicated. 3 tentacles come in this wave rather than 2. You'll need to have 2 players soak these as the slams go off over a 9-second period, which is just too long for a single soaker. Now the players will have to be ranged as melee players will be dealing with orbs. However, we have 2 Holy Paladins, so you can assign them to soak the first 2 hits, because even if one Holy Paladin gets the orb, the other one can just take over. So we have the Holy Paladins take the first 2 hits, and then we have a Hunter take the last hit. But you can of course change that for 2 Hunters if you want, or anything else that you just have available. Now for the 5th set of tentacles, you need to have a ranged player immune the 2 at the front, as the melee orbs will come in at this point. And for the 6th set of tentacles, you really shouldn't have them at this point, but if you do need to soak it, you'll need to have a ranged player at the back and a melee player soak the one at the front. And that's it, really. However, throughout all of these soaks, you really do need to be careful of the breaths that, of course, are going straight down the middle of the room, which is where you're standing to soak, you got to make sure that you keep an eye on the breath timer as well as the slam timer, and make sure that you have an immunity up for both of those things, because either of them will just one-shot you. So providing you can deal with all of these mechanics, you can deal with the tentacle, you can deal with the breath, you can deal with the taint of the sea, and the orb sort of rotation with melee and range players, you just keep this repeating until the boss reaches 65% health, which should be roughly after her 5th tentacle slam. Now phase 2 has changed a fair amount on Mythic. Rather than just having a ton of tentacles that you just need to kill in your own time, only 2 tentacles will be up at any given moment. At the beginning of the phase, you have one on each of the raised platforms. You want to split your raid into 2 groups and try and split the DPS as evenly as possible. You'll need to run up to each of the platforms and start killing off the tentacles whilst you're avoiding any of the incoming waves. Now early on both of the platforms, you'll have a Mist Watcher ad spawn. These ads don't do anything apart from cast Mist Infusion. If they successfully cast this ability, it will give the boss more energy and bring in waves even faster, and that's pretty much a wipe. You cannot let these casts go off. So you will need to kill these ads off as soon as you possibly can, and it is possible to kill them before the cast even goes off. However, if it is just about to land, interrupt them. Interrupting the cast will immediately force the Mist Watcher to recast the ability, which is great because it resets the cast time, but it will do a burst of damage to the entire raid. And because of this, it is super important that you assign only a single player to interrupt the cast, because if multiple people do it all at the same time, you'll have a shit ton of bursts going off all at once and your raid will be very, very dead. Now if you have a Death Knight in your group, you can actually death grip these Mist Callers to interrupt them. Unfortunately, this doesn't proc the burst of damage on the raid either. However, no other form of CC or displacement will do this, so don't waste your time. If you have a death grip, use it. If not, just kind of put up with it and make sure you interrupt it. Now after the Mist Caller is dead, you'll need to switch to either the Mariner, which is spawned on the right hand side, or the Grimelore, which is spawned on the left. You want both sides to cleave these down on top of the tentacle. Now these 2 ads have changed a very small amount. The Mariner's Give No Quarter on Mythic targets 3 players rather than 1. You got to make sure that you move from it, and if you can be pre-spread, that'll be great because then less people will have to move, because you really want to optimize your damage while you're up here. But most importantly, the Grimelord's Plague that he puts on players doesn't only spread when it times out, it will now attempt to spread each time it ticks. So just like when you're fighting the Mariner, it is super vital that you are pre-spread on the Grimelord side before the plague comes out, otherwise you'll just start instantly spreading it around. And when it spreads, it has a habit of going up to higher stacks than it was when you spread it, so it makes your healers have to heal even more, and they're trying to regain their mana throughout this phase, so just give your healers a break and don't spread the plague. Now both sides need to be coordinated in the amount of damage that they do to the tentacles, because they both need to die within a 10-second window of one another. So as an example, if the tentacle on the left dies and the tentacle on the right doesn't die within 10 seconds, it will just despawn and no damage will be done to Helya, which means you're getting to phase 3 a lot slower, and this phase is already pretty structured as it is, and if anything goes wrong, you might as well just wipe it. So make sure whenever you're damaging both tentacles that they die within a 10-second window of one another. Just make sure you're talking to one another and just have a look on your boss frames. It's in the boss frames icon in the UI, so just keep an eye on those percentages just so they die within that window of one another. So next up, you'll have tentacles spawn directly under the platform, one on each side, and you'll have a single Mist Caller that will spawn somewhere downstairs. You want to drop down and nuke the tentacles whilst your ranged DPS kill off the Mist Caller. At the same time, you'll have a ton of decaying minions spawn. It is vital that you kill these guys downstairs so that the waves will wash away all the shit that they leave on the floor. However, you do need to find a balance. You need to have enough damage on the Mist Caller so it dies before it casts, which is super easy if you have a death grip on top of it. You also need enough damage to kill the decaying minions so that they die before you need to go back upstairs for the next set of waves. And you also need to have enough damage on the tentacles so that they die before the next set of waves, because the next tentacles are upstairs and otherwise you're wasting time downstairs. And both tentacles need to die within 10 seconds of one another. So it's pretty tight, and unfortunately, because we can't see what your DPS composition is, we don't know exactly how you need to assign your DPS for your comp. Generally speaking, we just have our hunters and our mages deal with all the decaying minions whilst cleaving onto the tentacles, whilst everyone else just pretty much just tunnels into the tentacles. Even when the decaying minions are dying around them, they just remain there and continue to stand in all the shit that spawns all over the floor, because it doesn't do a ton of damage, and if you can use a single healing cooldown at this point and like a couple of spot heals here and there, you'll more than easily out heal the decay damage. So kill off those tentacles and you'll be absolutely fine. Once that is done, 2 new tentacles will spawn upstairs and you want to rush up there nice and quickly before the waves arrive. Now this time the Mariner will be on the left hand side and the Grimelore will be on the right hand side. You just want to repeat what you did the first time around, and then you'll have to deal with the last set of tentacles that spawn at the back of the room. Much like these tentacles that spawn at the front of the room, this is pretty tight on damage. You again need to kill the Mistcaller that will randomly spawn somewhere downstairs. You also need to kill the tentacles, and you need to kill the decaying minions, and the thing is you need to kill this before the waves are even cast, because if you get the next set of waves come in, you'll get the Mariner and the Grime Lord spawn immediately, as well as some Mistcallers upstairs, and it's just a fucking mess. You cannot reach that point. The tentacles need to die before the waves come in. So once again, you'll need to work out a balance of what DPS needs to attack what target at any given point. Generally speaking, we just have both groups stacked under their own tentacles and we just cleave through everything. And because we have a death grip, we grip the Mistwatcher underneath one of the tentacles and we just cleave on top of her as well. During this time, people are going to be melee hit by some of the decaying minions and they're going to be standing in the goo. It is a lot of damage going out on the raid, however, it is the most efficient thing to do, just to, you know, kill everything off as soon as you possibly can. At this point, we use some personal cooldowns if needed, as well as stuff like Vampiric Embrace to help the healers top us up, because some people are getting absolutely annihilated. The main thing that you need to take away when killing these last set of tentacles, not only do you have to kill them very quickly, but all of the decaying minions' decaying goo that they leave on the ground, you want that to be as far away from Helya as possible, because you want to leave yourself as much room as possible when going into phase 3. And of course, phase 3 will begin once both tentacles are dead.
Now the orbs in this phase will now leave a trail of shit behind them, just like they did in Heroic. They will, however, still have a beam connecting them. So you still need to use your strategy from phase 1 where you stacked up. However, with all the gunk on the ground, you can't use the same stacking location every single time. And instead, you now have 6 locations you need to learn. 5 of them are just outside melee range of the boss, and there's 1 towards the back of the room on the right hand side at range. All orbs that come in are kited towards the back of the room, just like the previous ones were in phase 1. However, there is 1 set of orbs where you move from the right to the left. We'll explain that in a moment. Now you will still have ranged and melee sets of orbs in this phase, however tanks are no longer included with this. They will never be targeted by orbs at all. So on the ranged orbs, instead of having the tank, you'll have 1 extra range, and on the melee orbs, instead of having the tank, you have 1 extra melee. Also in this phase, you will still have Taint of the Sea. You need to deal with it the exact same way as you did in phase 1. However, people are more spread in this phase in comparison to, say, phase 1 because of everything that's going on, which means your healers need to be a little bit more efficient with dispelling people, rather than relying on mass dispels every single time. Now, before we talk about any of the other stuff in this phase, as you guessed, movement and positioning again is key. It's very similar to phase 1. So let's talk about exactly what we do at what point. Right at the start of the phase, we go to our red marker, we get a master spell, and then we immediately move to the blue marker for the next ranged orbs. The ranged orbs are kited towards the back, and then healers and melee need to move to red for the next set of orbs. They're kited again towards the back, and at the same time you'll need to dispel debuffs. We then have healers and range stack on a marker towards the back of the room on the right hand side, and we move all the way from the right to the left hand side of the room. And it's at this point that you'll have your first wave. And in this phase we use a healing cooldown for every single wave that hits the raid. We then dispel and spread, and the reason why we spread is because at this point you'll get a Mariner spawn. You must blow him up as soon as you possibly can, and at the same time healers need to move under triangle for the melee orbs. Make sure you don't move under too early, because otherwise you are going to get give no quarter circles all over that marker, which just fucks it up for everyone. So only move under when that spell's on cooldown. The orbs are then kited towards the back, and again you need to do dispels. Next up is ranged orbs, and they're placed to the right hand side of the triangle mark, which is on the moon mark, and again they're kited towards the back. And then we have the next set of melee orbs, which is directly in the middle. Again, they're kited towards the back. And it's at this point our raid moves over towards red, and this is when you're going to get the second wave. We have a master spell, and then afterwards we all move to blue. At the exact same time, a Mariner will be up and casting Give No Quarter. We bait all 3 Give No Quarter circles on top of the blue marker, and then move slightly further back for the next range orbs that come in immediately afterwards. We then have melee orbs on top of red, they're kited towards the back. We then have the ranged orbs on the marker towards the back, and this is where you then run to the opposite side. You'll then have your third wave and another Mariner, but this Mariner spawns slightly later in comparison to the first one. So if you wanted to as a healer, you could immediately move to the melee marker, the triangle, ready for the next melee orbs. After those orbs, you'll then have ranger orbs on top of moon, and it's really important that, again, you don't move there early. There is a Mariner up. You need to make sure the Give No Quarters do not spawn on top of that location. Once you've dealt with the Mariner and you've dealt with those orbs, you'll then have melee orbs, which is on top of purple, and then you'll have your fourth wave. Now, this wave hits pretty damn hard, and as a result, it's a lot safer for your ranged and healers to simply avoid the damage by running up the raised platform on the right-hand side. Now, before going up, we do stack up for a master spell, which you can see on top of the orange marker, and have our healers try and top the melee as much as possible. Melee can also choose to come up on top of this raised platform with us if they really wanted to, but ultimately it's a lot better for them just to stay down, keep nuking the boss, and just use personal cooldowns instead. Once we do go upstairs, we let the waves go past, and then we'll have ranged orbs. We simply just jump back down, and all the orbs sort of get stuck on the raised platform, like they don't really path very well coming down. So they're not an issue at all. We just jump straight down, then the healers will move on to red, because this is when you have your next set of melee orbs. Once you're done with them, you'll then have ranged orbs on the marker at the back. You want to move from the right-hand side to the left-hand side, but ranged DPS, instead of just staying on the left-hand side, you can now go all the way up on the left-hand side platform, ready for the next set of waves, because the next set of orbs that come in are the melee orbs, so healers, you can't go up on the platform, you need to go to the triangle instead with the melee, kite those orbs back, you'll then have the next wave, and really, when this wave comes in, which is the 5th wave, the boss should be dead by this point, especially after nerfs. I mean, you can kill the boss before the 3rd wave now. Yeah. So, if you can try and kill the boss before this point, you really should. And after this point, we don't know. We've never got past that point.
No.
Because the boss is always dead before then. And that's all you really need to know about positioning.
That's a lot of movement.
Yeah.
As you can see, it's very repetitive as well. But once you've done like a full loop and you have the damage, you can very easily kill the boss. However, there is, of course, more things for you to deal with. That's just how you deal with orbs and debuffs. We have a breath to deal with. Now, the breath circles that are left on the ground that people soak on Mythic that gives you that healing absorption shield, it needs to be topped up within a certain period of time, otherwise those players will become mind controlled and they'll turn into like a Mistwatcher, and the only way to break them out is by getting them down to 10% health, but then they're on 10% health with loads of damage going out. It's really risky, so you need to top up those players nice and quickly so you don't get mind controls running everywhere. And on top of this, you really do need to assign who's going to be standing in each of these shadowy circles, and you will need to assign 5 players on Mythic. We recommend that you assign 1 tank or a melee DPS for the first circle, and then for the 4 range circles, you have 4 ranged DPS do it. This works perfectly until a ranged DPS gets fixated by the orbs at the same time that they need to go and soak a circle. To solve that issue, we assign backups to each of the ranged players from the melee DPS camp. That way you'll never, even if you are really unlucky from orbs, have no one to fill one of the circle spots, because the ranged and the melee, as you are now more than aware, get fixated at different times with the orbs. Now, the best players to soak these circles are definitely mages and hunters. Not only are they super mobile classes, but mainly they can help self-heal either with blink or with immunities or exhilarations. All of that kind of stuff is really nice to use at set points at certain breaths, because there is a shit ton of stuff going on all at the same time. The worst overlap you're probably going to experience is when the 4th breath happens as you're kiting orbs from one side of the room to the other, because you need to then return back into the path of the orbs in order to soak the breath. Because of this, we have our hunters soak the 2 at the back because they can run through the orbs with deterrence, and we have every single player in that line just use an immunity. If you want at this point as well, you can also continue on with your immunity, just let it time out, because there will be a wave coming in at the same time, and I'm sure your healers are probably panicking trying to top everyone else up at the same time. Now, for the first 4 breaths, you just want them face down the middle of the room, because it's the easiest, so everyone can get to it nice and quickly. However, for the 5th and the 6th breath, you want them to be off at a certain angle. This is because you find yourself on the 5th breath is that most of the left-hand side of the room is completely coated in shit, and nobody has anywhere to kind of stand if you're facing the breath down the middle of the room. So at that point, we face the breath down towards the right-hand side at a slight angle. Also, at this point, there is a ton of incoming damage from like decaying minions, which we'll get to in a second, as well as like debuffs, and the healers have to kite at this point as well. So we really recommend on the 5th breath that you use your own healing cooldowns in some way, so exhilarations or blinks or even health pots at this point, just so you can remove the shield as soon as you possibly can and help your healers out a lot. For the 6th breath, once again, you don't have a lot of space at this point, so we face it over towards the left-hand side instead, because the right-hand side's covered in shit. However, there isn't that much stuff going on at this point, so you don't necessarily need to use a healing cooldown or anything. However, this is the last breath you're going to soak, so use whatever you've got. So breaths themselves aren't particularly hard to deal with, you just got to know when they're coming in and just be very prepared and just get ready to call out if you happen to need a backup soaker. However, one last mechanic that you really can't ignore, like you maybe did on Heroic, is the decaying minions. 4 of these guys will spawn, and once again they will just fixate on people. They just need to die. They do so much damage on top of everything else, and the healers are quite tested in this phase, and you don't need that extra damage source coming in. However, the main thing that you need to be aware of with these decaying minions is the patches of goo they leave on the ground. As you can tell, this phase is very position based, and one patch of goo in the completely wrong place can screw over your strategy. So when these guys come in, if they're fixated on you, try and take them away from any stacking locations. kill them off in pre-existing goo is a great place to kill them. Use things like knockbacks and stuns while they're in that sort of place and just kill them off. You definitely want the majority of your DPS switch over to killing off these decaying minions as soon as you possibly can, even if it does screw your single target damage on the boss. These guys do need to die nice and quickly just to keep this phase clean.
But providing you can deal with those decaying minions, the real main test in this last phase is just getting to the breath in time, making sure the right people are in the right breath in the right locations, using the right cooldowns for the right breath, as well as making sure that they have backups available for them just in case they get orbs before the breath spawns. And then, of course, everyone knowing exactly what orbs are coming in next, where they need to be stood for those orbs, and when you need to go upstairs to avoid the waves.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
There's a lot of shit going on. Yeah.
Everyone's always talking.
As well as killing the Mariner as well.
Yeah, I've got to kill the Mariner, and he has 100% extra health because he's solo in this phase. So yeah, there's a lot going on. It's very much, it's a very like cycle-based phase though. Once you've kind of done the first set, okay, we can do the right-hand side, we can do the left-hand side. It kind of remains very similar. Well, it does get faster and faster.
That is true. Yeah, as the fight goes on, the abilities are thrown out quicker in that last phase, and that's why you really need to kill the boss before the 5th wave, because after that is just a clusterfuck.
Yeah,
but the main thing that really need to keep in mind when it comes down to your progression of this boss, if you can nail down phase 1, you can pretty much nail down phase 3. Phase 1 is pretty much phase 3.
Yeah.
It's very, very similar. It's just all about standing in the right place at the right time. It's just phase 3, there's multiple places you need to stand.
Yeah.
But if you learn those places, and your damage is good, and you can stand in a breath, it's pretty easy.
Yeah, a lot of guilds, once they've done phase 1 and they've got that down, normally the boss drops pretty quickly afterwards.
Yeah.
Phase 1 definitely seems to be the hardest phase to learn and progress in, because the rest of the phases are very similar.
Yeah.
But either way, guys, thank you so much for watching. Sorry for it being such a long video, and I guess sorry for it being a bit late, but we did want to make sure it was correct because of the nerfs and everything. Turns out it didn't change too much. But either way, thank you so much for watching. If this video did help you out, then do leave a like on it. Helps us out so much. And of course, a big shout out to our supporters over on Patreon. You guys absolutely rock. You keep us doing what we're doing. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.
In Nighthold.
In Nighthold. Yeah.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.